Welcome back to Radio Entrepreneurs. I'm Jonathan Freedman, joined today by Marc Z Legal Staffing. Marc, always a pleasure to have you on Radio Entrepreneurs.
John, great to be here as always, and excited for the summer, and continuing to think about very interesting and challenging subjects.
Well, we're certainly living in challenging times. The proverbs always come around and come true. You want to talk today about some interesting stuff going on within the workforce. We're talking about hours and the number of hours that people are putting in. And, it's always seems to be something, there's trade-offs everywhere, right? Less commuting time, more work time.
Correct. No, I think a lot of people signed up for the idea about a remote or a hybrid schedule because it will save them with their commuting and commuting costs. But one of the challenges when we talk to a lot of prospective candidates or candidates that we're looking at positions, one of the reasons why they're looking for new positions, even if they're remote or hybrid, are the hours, because they can't necessarily cut the hours down. So even if you're working remotely or and then have a hybrid schedule or totally remote, it's a 24-hour cycle often, and the expectations when somebody is working remote in any capacity is that you're going to answer when the email comes within a reasonable time of that. And I think a lot of people are trying to figure that out. Professionals at all levels, managers, junior employees, where is the cutoff? And
yeah, it's a great question, an interesting question, and I think it goes to etiquette to some degree. Yes, there's the practical aspect, and I know in a lot of law firms per se, or it used to be this sort of expectation of X number of billable hours per year.
right,
And those are always varying, and the big guys set the lead, and then everybody sort of follows. And but where does that line in the sand, or is there a line in the sand? Is the expectation 24/7 availability? And if so, what's the etiquette associated with it? And I think it starts from the top.
right,
And it seems to me we're living more and more in a boundaryless world where, you have a thought at 7 o'clock on a Saturday night, send it to your colleague and, hope that they respond, or is there an expectation that they respond? And I know there's a lot of industry, what do I call it? Nuance associated with it, various industries, where there's an expectation that you're, on the clock 24/7.
right.
So what are you seeing? What are you seeing? Some pushback from candidates? Are you seeing people who are, having that discussion in advance of taking a position and trying to understand expectations? But there's always that risk associated with, if you start asking those types of questions, are you no longer a candidate for a position?
Right. Well, first of all, it's interesting you bring up the law firm part of billable hours, because some firms will say, okay, we just expect, here are our boundaries of timing. We expect you to be here from 9 to 5 and bill X amount of hours during that time. And those are the firms mostly that are in the office firm, or here are the hours that we have the expectation for 1,600 billable hours for smaller firms, or for more mid-sized firms. And then what they do is they say, okay, here's the minimum of 1,600, but we have bonuses if you hit 1,800. Or the same thing, some firms with 1,800, which is usually around the standard now. But if you get to another baseline, like 1950, will increase it. So you want to, on one hand, achieve what needs to be done for your job success. On the other hand, that's a minimal requirement of the billable hours. You always want to exceed it. So there's that pressure to exceed the hours to hit the billable requirements. And a lot of people want to do that because obviously financially it works, but at the same time, it pushes more hours. Sometimes people, like attorneys, if they're remote or they're hybrid remote, hybrid schedule remote in terms of the timing in the office, will work maybe starting at 12 in the afternoon into the late evening, because they have to achieve certain billable hours. So it's a balance. I think Candidates now, when they're looking at positions, one of the first things they ask are, what are the billable hours? What's the requirement? Is there a guide or is it mandatory? In terms of other different, if it's a manager that has to be on site, then obviously they have the regular hours. In terms of response time, when people are working from home or remote, where does it end? I think that, I don't know about yourself, but myself is what I say to my team, if I really need you, if it's essential, then I will speak to you at night, or if it's something that comes up that you're interested in. Otherwise, maybe what I'll do is I'll send them a message in some way. I'm not going to call with the idea is this is something that requires immediate attention or not necessary to respond. And I think that
Well,
creating expectations in terms of not having to respond. And but if I'm calling you on a weekend, then it's really important. But if it's
it's interesting that you raise it because I think that's where I was sort of going with etiquette, and it sort of speaks to what sort of culture do you want to establish in your organization. And present company excluded, but notwithstanding, how many emergencies do you really run into in your industry? I mean, we're not talking life and death, right? We're talking the potential to have a candidate
I'm not when I
placed, and it
say
may be a timeliness of a situation, right, and
when
something that needs to be dealt with.
right, when I say to you, unless I really have to, it's not like right an emergency, but like for example, in our business, for example, we're working with people who are significantly or most of the people we work with are currently employed, and so when they need to be called often, it's in the evening or at night or before work. It's very difficult to talk otherwise, and so there's a
And
situation where my members of my team might have to speak to somebody at night. But if there's
yep.
no urgency or a weekend, but then I agree with you, then that's creating expectations. I totally agree with you.
Well, it's interesting because I think a lot of people, I don't think it's so much of a necessarily a passing the buck, but it's top of my mind. Therefore, I better pass it on because I'm going to forget, a day from now,
Right,
and I think it speaks to culture that you want to establish in an organization. And I think what I'm seeing, anyways, is a lot of young people, and again, it's somewhat industry specific. But a lot of young people are pushing back and saying, well, I don't want to carry my phone on the weekends and have to respond to things, or I don't want to have to be on call, or there goes my weekend when I have a notice on a Saturday afternoon of something that I've got to crack open. I think the flexibility goes both ways. Technology and cell phones, the bane of our existence. It's great because it allows you flexibility, but that flexibility is really, on the flip side of that, it's a 24/7 availability. And I
right,
think it speaks to, leaders and supervisors within organizations sort of putting themselves in that candidate or employees mindset and saying, how would I feel if I was, X years old and somebody was reaching out to me on a Saturday evening as I'm sitting there, with friends trying to have dinner and getting a request that's clearly not urgent,
right,
urgent
right,
nature. And so, it's fascinating, and I see it all the time. And I think I know I've talked about my son who's taken on a career that seems as though there's no boundaries, 24/7, 7 days a week, 365 days a year. And when do you shut it off? When do you push
right,
back at 2 a.m. on a Saturday night and say, I'm done?
right,
I can't go
right,
any further.
right,
Or 5 a.m. or 6 a.m., and it's continuous. And I think that we've become a culture where, there are no boundaries.
right,
And I think that, it speaks to what I think hiring managers have to think about. What sort of tone do they want to set? What sort of organizational, because again, if you're an owner of a company, you may have a better return down the road, or how many bonuses am I going to get to respond to emails at midnight on Saturday?
right.
And so balancing that and really finding a culture that's consistent with where you want to be. And I think it's tough for younger people to set those boundaries in a lot of ways today.
Right. I agree with you. I think that, as you say, it's creating expectations. If you're a supervisor and you want to get something off your plate, you should tell your person this is not time sensitive. Do not expect them, even in the caption. Do not expect to hear from you until till Monday. If
Yep.
there's something, if there's a call that has something that has some urgency in it, then you want to give the person a heads up. Otherwise, you do not want to be calling somebody. There's got to be lines on a weekend because you want your team to be, or if they call at night,
re-energized and engaged to come the weekday.
right,
And I think also where we're in a world where people have competing interests. I'm at my kid's game at 7 o'clock at night. I want to focus there. Yeah,
right,
I'll deal with it at 8 o'clock when I get back or what have you.
right,
And I think just understanding that there should be boundaries and expectations. One of the challenges I think with mobile technology is a lot of people, elderly parents, they're sleeping with it next to their bed, or kids away at college or what have you. And, at 4 a.m. to get that text from your boss saying, can you deal with this in the morning? It's like, I don't need to be woken up by that,
right,
So
right,
it's a fine line. And I think, one of the takeaways for me is people need to think about how they want to be treated as they're
right,
treating others, and
right.
setting that tone early on.
Right. I think expectations, I think you said it, creating expectations, establishing boundaries that will work for the employer and employee. I think when the employee starts, or maybe as a continuum, setting expectations. So the person knows, I need to respond if I get a call, because it's an urgent call or it's got some urgency to it, or otherwise there's no need to respond, or I need to respond or don't need to respond to some type of message unless there's an urgency on it. And at the same time, the employer wants to respect the employee's time, because as you say, that you want them to be engaged, rejuvenated, and ready to take on all the tasks when they're at work time.
And as we've talked about, Mark, always great insight, always great discussions. We can go on forever, but we're limited here in our segments on Radio Entrepreneurs. As always, thanks for your great advice. Our crack team of reporters at Radio Entrepreneurs, Marc Z. If people want to get in touch with you, want to reach out to you, what's the best way they're going to reach you?
Well, first of all, thank you, John. Great being on the show as always. First of all, Google Marc Z, M-A-R-C, the letter Z. Our wonderful Radio Entrepreneurs website, radioentrepreneurs.com. Go to Marc Z Legal, MarczLegal.com, and 617-338-1300.
Excellent, Mark. Always a pleasure. We'll be right back with another timely and topical subject on Radio Entrepreneurs.